Hoa demolished my mansion, but it was the wrong house. It all started with the sound of engines outside my window. I thought it was just road work, just another morning in the mountains. But when I stepped outside, I saw bulldozers tearing into the walls of my dream home. Wood shattering, glass breaking, neighbors whispering, cameras pointing. And the worst part? Everyone thought I was guilty, everyone believed the HOA story. But here's the truth. That house they destroyed. It wasn't even supposed to be mine. What happened next will shock you. Hello everyone, and welcome back to HOA Rule Stories. My name is Richard. I'm a retired engineer living in the mountains of Colorado. And like many of you, I bought a home thinking it would be my peaceful escape. But instead, I ended up living through one of the most unbelievable HOA nightmares you'll ever hear. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Drop your state in the comments. And if you're over 50 like me, don't forget to subscribe. Think of it like joining our neighborhood coffee chat. No rules, no fines, just stories we all understand. I remember standing there, frozen, watching my whole world collapse in front of me. The machines didn't slow down. The men in hard hats didn't even look up. It was as if my screams were nothing more than background noise to the sound of breaking wood and twisting steel. My mansion, the place I worked my whole life for, was being ripped apart, piece by piece. The dust filled my lungs. I could barely breathe. The ground shook beneath me each time the excavator slammed into another wall. My hands were trembling, my heart pounding so loud I thought it would burst. I yelled again. Stop! Stop! This is the wrong house. But no one stopped. A group of neighbors stood at the end of the street, whispering among themselves. Some even had their phones out, recording. Can you imagine? Watching a man's life collapse and treating it like cheap entertainment? Their faces said it all. They didn't believe me. They thought I was the guy who refused to pay his fines, the man who brought this on himself. But I wasn't that man. I was innocent. And yet here I was, powerless, screaming in front of bulldozers that didn't care whose life they were crushing. I tried to run to the officer standing by the barricade. He barely looked at me. He just said, "Sir, please step back. It's not safe here." His hand rested lazily on his belt, and his eyes stayed on the workers. Like I was just another bystander, not the owner of the house they were destroying. I pulled out papers from my pocket, proof of my payments, proof of my ownership. Receipts, letters, everything. My hands shook as I shoved them in his direction. But he didn't even read them. He just repeated, "Step back, sir." That was the moment I realized, nobody was going to help me. The HOA had spoken. The machines had started. And there was nothing left for me but to watch. The first crash of glass hit me hardest. My dining room window, my wife's favorite spot to sit in the morning, where the sun poured in and lit up her coffee cup like gold, was now nothing but shards raining down into the dirt. The sound echoed in my chest. Then the roof began to sag. The wooden beams creaked and groaned, struggling to hold on as the excavator's claw tore deeper. And finally, the wall that held my family photos fell forward, splintering into pieces. I saw frames scatter, break, and vanish under rubble. Generations of memories, gone in seconds. And the worst part? Nobody cared. Not the workers. Not the officer. Not even my neighbors. All I could see were blank stares, raised eyebrows, and whispers. That's what happens when you don't pay your dues. About time the HOA took action. Lies. All lies. But in that moment, their whispers cut deeper than the bulldozer's claw. Because now I wasn't just losing my house. I was losing my dignity too. I fell to my knees. My jeans pressed into the gravel, and my palms scraped against the ground. I don't even remember breathing. All I remember is staring, helpless, at the mansion I built with my blood and sweat, falling apart in front of my eyes. And then I heard a voice. It was Mrs. Thompson, my neighbor from across the street. She was recording the whole thing, her phone pointed straight at my house. She looked at me, almost with pity, and said, "I told you the HOA doesn't play around." My blood boiled. My throat burned. I wanted to shout back, to tell her she had it wrong, to scream the truth, but my voice cracked. And what good would it do? Everyone had already decided I was guilty. I stood up again, my fists clenched. I marched back to the barricade, past the officer, straight toward the man in charge of the crew. He wore a neon vest and carried a clipboard. His helmet covered most of his face, but I could see his eyes glance at me for just a second before looking away. "Sir, please get back," he said, almost annoyed. "We have an order. We're just doing our job." "What order?" I shouted. "Show me. Show me where it says my house." But he didn't. He just shook his head, muttered something about "not my problem," and signaled to the excavator operator. And just like that, another wall came crashing down. It was the sound of finality. The sound of an ending. At that moment, I realized I had entered a fight I wasn't prepared for. This wasn't just about bricks and wood. This was about power, authority, and the unstoppable machine that an HOA can become when nobody dares to question them. As the dust thickened, I stepped back onto the street. My lungs ached, my eyes burned, and my heart sank lower than I ever thought it could. I looked at my neighbors again. None of them smiled. None of them cheered. But none of them helped either. And maybe that silence hurt more than anything. I whispered to myself, "Why me? Why my house?" And deep inside, a small voice answered, "Because you were easy. Because you trusted them. Because you believed they would never make such a mistake." But mistakes can destroy a life. And in my case, a mistake had already destroyed a mansion. The story had just begun. And I knew the truth would come out. But for now, all I could do was stand in the rubble and wonder. How could the people I trusted with my community confuse my home with another? What would you do if one morning you woke up and saw bulldozers tearing down your home, and nobody believed you when you said it was a mistake? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your thoughts. I wasn't always the man standing in the dust of a broken house. Before the bulldozers, before the shouting, before the betrayal, life felt simple. Peaceful. Almost perfect. When I first saw the mansion, I thought, this is it, this is where I'll spend the rest of my life. The view stretched for miles. Pine trees lined the horizon. In the mornings, the fog would drift down the mountain and roll across the lawn like a soft white blanket. The kind of mornings that made you want to sip coffee slowly, let the sunlight warm your face, and forget the world outside. The house itself was more than wood and stone. It was my reward. Decades of work, sleepless nights, sacrifices, and finally something to call mine. A home built not just with money but with dreams. Every corner held a story. The fireplace where I'd sit with a glass of bourbon and an old book. The balcony where I watched storms roll over the mountains, lightning cracking like a movie scene. Even the creak of the wooden stairs felt like music to me. I told myself I had found peace. And part of that peace, or so I believed, came from the HOA. Yes, they were strict. Yes, they sent letters about silly things, trash cans left too close to the road, a lawn that was half an inch too high. But I thought, maybe it's worth it. Maybe their rules keep everything clean, keep the neighborhood safe, keep the value of our home strong. I trusted them. Maybe that was my first mistake. The first sign of trouble was small. A notice, folded and stuck to my door. It was a fine. Late payment of HOA dues. At first, I laughed. Surely it was a mistake. I never missed payments. I kept receipts. I even set reminders on my phone. I called their office right away. The woman on the line sounded tired, like she'd answered the same complaint 100 times that day. "Sir, the notice is final. Your dues are overdue." "No, you don't understand," I told her. I've paid. Look, I have proof. She sighed. She promised she'd make a note of it. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. A week later, another notice came. Then another. Each one harsher than the last. The language changed from unpaid balance to serious violation. And then, the word demolition appeared. Demolition. For unpaid fines. I shook my head in disbelief. How could a community association have the power to even think of tearing down someone's home? It sounded like madness. I walked over to the HOA office in person. Their building was small, tucked behind the clubhouse. I carried a folder thick with receipts, every payment I had ever made. I laid them on the desk like cards in a poker game. The man behind the counter adjusted his glasses, skimmed the papers, and said, "I see the issue, your name was mixed with another lot. A clerical error. Nothing to worry about. Nothing to worry about." I left that office with relief in my chest. I thought the storm had passed. But storms don't always announce themselves with thunder. Sometimes they wait, silent, until they're ready to strike. Neighbors began looking at me differently. Mr. Peterson from next door stopped waving in the mornings. The Johnsons across the street pulled their children closer when I walked by. Whispers followed me, the kind that sting worse than shouted insults. "Did you hear? He hasn't paid in years. They say he owes thousands." I heard the board already voted. I laughed it off at first. Gossip dies quickly, I thought. But it didn't. It grew. And then came the letter that froze my blood. Bold red ink across the top, final notice. It said I had 30 days before further action would be taken. Further action. I sat at my kitchen table, the letter trembling in my hands. My coffee went cold. My appetite vanished. I read the words over and over, searching for logic, for reason, for hope. But all I found was fear. I called again. I begged them to look at my records. Each time, they told me the same thing: it's under review. Review. What they didn't say was that, behind closed doors, the board was making decisions. Decisions that would seal my fate. Decisions that would one day send bulldozers to my front door. And the cruelest part? I didn't know it yet. I kept living my life. Mowing the lawn. Fixing the fence. Smiling politely at neighbors who refused to smile back. I told myself it was just paperwork. Just a silly mix-up that would vanish like smoke. But inside, deep inside, something gnawed at me. A quiet dread that whispered, "They're coming for you." And the whispers grew louder when, one evening, I found another notice on my door. This time it wasn't about dues. It wasn't about fines. It was about compliance. They claimed my property violated community standards. No explanation. No details. Just a demand for immediate correction. I stood on my porch, staring at my perfect lawn, my freshly painted shutters, my spotless driveway. And I asked myself, what could they possibly want from me now? The sun dipped behind the mountains. The shadows stretched long across my yard. And as the cold air settled in, I realized. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about power. And once people get a taste of power, they don't stop. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the creak of the house as if it were warning me of what was to come. My wife tried to calm me. She said, "Don't worry, it'll all work out." But her words felt thin. Because I knew storms were brewing. And the question that haunted me most was this. How do you fight an enemy you can't see, when that enemy wears the mask of your own community? If your HOA sent you letters again and again, claiming you owed money you never did, would you fight back, or would you try to stay quiet and hope it blows over? Tell me honestly in the comments. I want to know how you'd handle it. The morning it all happened didn't feel different at first. The sky was clear, the birds sang in the trees, and the smell of pine drifted in through my window. I brewed my coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and told myself it was just another day. But somewhere deep inside, something felt wrong. The air was heavy, too heavy for a sunny morning. My chest was tight, like the world was holding its breath. And then I heard it. Engines. At first, I thought it was roadwork on the other side of the neighborhood. But the sound grew louder. A low rumble that shook the glasses in my cabinet. I stepped onto the porch and froze. Down the street, 2 bulldozers crawled toward my house, yellow monsters with steel claws glinting in the sun. Behind them came trucks, men in vests, and flashing lights. A barricade went up across the road as if I was some kind of criminal. My coffee slipped from my hand and shattered on the porch. I ran to the driveway, waving my arms. Wait! Wait! You've got the wrong place. But they didn't wait. The first truck stopped right in front of my mansion. Men jumped out, rolled out yellow tape, and hammered a sign into my lawn, "Order of Demolition." I tore the sign out of the ground, my hands shaking. This is a mistake. Look at the address, this isn't the right house. The crew chief glanced at his clipboard, shrugged, and gave a signal with his hand. The bulldozer's engine roared louder. The steel claw rose high into the air. And then, the first strike came. The claw slammed into the front wall with a sound I'll never forget. Wood cracked, bricks tumbled, and dust exploded into the air. It was like lightning striking my heart. I ran forward, but 2 officers grabbed me by the arms. "Sir, you need to stay back." "Stay back? That's my house," I shouted, twisting in their grip. "Look at the papers. Look at the name." But they didn't listen. Their faces were blank, their eyes cold. To them, I wasn't a man losing his home, I was just another problem to manage. Neighbors gathered on the sidewalks. Some shook their heads, others whispered. I caught fragments of their words. "He should have paid. I heard he owed thousands. HOA doesn't play around." Each word stabbed deeper than the claw of the machine. I shouted again. My throat burned. "I paid every dollar. I have proof." The proof was in my folder, the one I grabbed from the table before running outside. I held it up, waving it like a flag. Receipts, bank statements, all there. I shoved them at one of the officers, begging him to read. He didn't even look. He pushed my hands away. Behind me, another wall came down. The sound was deafening. Glass shattered, wood splintered, and memories turned into rubble. I saw my living room collapse, the place where I spent Christmas with my children, the place where laughter once echoed. I saw the balcony crumble, the one where I watched sunsets with my wife. And then I saw the roof sag, groaning under the weight, before it split in two. My neighbors filmed it all. Their phones captured every crash, every scream. I wasn't a man to them anymore. I was a spectacle. A story to gossip about over dinner. And through it all, the HOA was nowhere to be seen. The board that had promised me safety, order, and fairness, they were silent. Hidden in their offices while my world turned to dust. I broke free from the officers for a moment and ran straight to the crew chief. I grabbed his arm, desperate. "Look again. Please. You're tearing down the wrong house." He pulled his arm back, annoyed. "We have orders. Signed and sealed. Talk to your board if you've got a problem." Orders. Signed and sealed. Words that felt like a death sentence. I stood in the street, surrounded by dust, noise, and disbelief. I screamed until my voice cracked. My knees buckled, and I fell to the ground, my palms scraping against the gravel. I could taste the dust in my mouth. I could feel it coating my skin. My tears left muddy streaks on my face. And still, nobody listened. The bulldozers kept working, tearing deeper, faster, hungrier. It was as if they enjoyed ripping apart my life, as if they were racing to finish before anyone could stop them. I closed my eyes and tried to shut it all out. But I couldn't. Every sound, every crash, every whisper from my neighbors burned into my memory. Time felt frozen, yet everything moved too fast. By the time the sun began to dip, half my mansion was gone. Nothing but a mountain of broken wood and shattered glass. And all I could think was, how could this happen? How could a mistake this big be allowed? I looked at the officer still standing near the barricade. He met my eyes for the first time that day. His face softened, just for a moment. And in that moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, he saw the truth. But then he turned away. And the machines kept moving. The dust grew thicker, the crowd larger, the whispers louder. And somewhere, in the back of my mind, I knew, this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning of something darker. Because if they could do this to me, who else would be next? If you saw your neighbor's home being demolished like this, would you step in and fight for them, or would you stay silent and watch? Be honest with me in the comments, I really want to know. My legs shook as I pulled myself up from the gravel, dust sticking to the sweat on my face. My voice was gone, my throat raw from screaming, but I couldn't stop. My house was still standing halfway, and as long as there were walls left, I still had to fight. I stumbled toward the barricade again, shoving past the officer this time. "Listen to me," I croaked, my voice breaking. "This is the wrong house. You're destroying the wrong house." For a moment, I thought I saw doubt in his eyes. But just as quickly, it was gone. He held out his hand to block me like I was some stranger, not the man whose life was being torn apart 10 feet away. The machines didn't stop. They moved with brutal rhythm: claw, slam, crash, claw, slam, crash. Every strike stole another piece of me. I spotted the crew chief again and sprinted to him. My chest burned, but I grabbed his clipboard with all the strength I had left. Papers scattered into the wind, flying across the rubble. He cursed and tried to snatch them back, but I already saw it. The address. It wasn't mine. It was 2 lots down. I held the paper up high, screaming as loud as my broken voice could manage. "Look! Look at this! It's not even my house." The workers paused for half a second, their eyes flicking between me and the chief. The crowd of neighbors leaned closer, murmuring. For the first time that day, silence fell heavy in the air. And then, the chief's face twisted. He snatched the paper back, crumpled it in his hand, and barked at the operator, "Keep going." The machines roared back to life. I felt like the earth had been pulled from beneath me. Proof. I had proof. And still, it meant nothing. I ran to the officer again, my voice desperate. "You saw it. You saw the paper. That's not my address." But he shook his head slowly. "Sir, step back. This isn't for me to decide. Not for him to decide. Not for anyone to decide." My life was being shredded before my eyes, and every person with power chose to look the other way. I turned to the crowd, pleading. "You all know this isn't right. You've lived next to me for years, you know I pay my dues." Some averted their eyes. Some kept filming. Some whispered even louder. And then, from the back, a voice cut through the air. "He's lying. The HOA wouldn't do this without a reason." The crowd nodded, muttered, agreed. Just like that, my truth was drowned by the weight of their doubt. Rage filled me. My hands clenched into fists. My chest heaved with every breath. I stormed past the barricade again, this time making it all the way to the bulldozer. The claw hovered above what was left of my living room. I stood in front of it, arms wide. "You'll have to go through me first." The operator hesitated. His hands hovered over the controls. For a moment, the whole street was silent. Dust floated in the air like snow. The world waited. Then the crew chief shouted, "Move him!" Hands grabbed me from behind. Strong, rough. 2 men pulled me back, dragging me across the dirt. My heels dug trenches in the ground, but they were too strong. I kicked, thrashed, cursed, but it didn't matter. The bulldozer moved forward. The claw came down. My living room gone. I fell to the ground again, gasping, staring at the rubble that used to be my life. My knees hit hard. My hands scraped open. Blood mixed with the dust. And in that moment, something inside me cracked. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was broken. But then, I saw her. My wife. She stood on the porch steps that still clung to the front of the house. Her face was pale, her hands shaking, but her eyes burned with fire. She shouted at the workers, at the officers, at the neighbors. Her voice cut through the chaos, sharp and furious. "This is our home. You people are destroying the wrong house. Do you have no shame?" Her courage lit a fire back inside me. I pushed myself up, wiped the blood from my palms, and stood tall beside her. Together, we shouted, begged, fought with every breath left in our bodies. But still, the machines did not stop. Every crash was another memory crushed. The bedroom where we dreamed of growing old together. The kitchen where she baked on Sunday mornings. The hallway lined with family photos. All of it, rubble. And I swear, the sound of laughter floated from the crowd. Whether it was real or just my mind cracking under the weight, I'll never know. But I felt it. The humiliation. The betrayal. The sun began to sink lower, painting the sky orange. Shadows stretched across the ruins of my mansion. The machine slowed, the crew packing up. But the damage was done. Half my home was gone, and the rest stood broken, wounded, gasping like a dying man. The officer finally released me. His eyes met mine once more, softer this time. Maybe he understood. Maybe he finally believed. But it was too late. The barricades lifted. The crowd drifted away. One by one, the trucks rolled out, leaving silence behind. Silence and destruction. I stood there in the fading light, holding my wife's hand, staring at the rubble. My heart was heavy, my chest hollow. Everything we built was gone. And the question that burned in my mind louder than the machines ever did was this. If proof, truth, and neighbors' eyes couldn't stop them, what chance did I ever have against the power of the HOA? If you were in my place, facing bulldozers, officers, and neighbors who didn't believe you, would you risk standing in front of the machine to protect your home, or would you step aside and watch it fall? Tell me in the comments, I want to know your honest answer. The night after the demolition felt endless. The silence in the mountains, once my comfort, now pressed down on me like a weight. No birds, no wind, no life, just the echo of crashing walls replaying again and again in my head. I couldn't close my eyes without seeing the claw ripping through my roof, without hearing the splinter of wood, without tasting the dust. I sat outside on what was left of my porch, staring at the broken shell of my mansion. My wife tried to sleep inside the one room still standing, but I couldn't. Every shadow looked like a bulldozer. Every whisper of wind sounded like engines returning. And then came the headlights. A black SUV rolled slowly down the street, quiet but deliberate. It stopped right at the edge of my driveway. Out stepped a man in a suit, his tie loose, his face stern. He didn't look at the rubble, he looked straight at me. The HOA president. He walked over calmly, like he was greeting me at a Sunday barbecue. His shoes crunched on the gravel, his hands behind his back. When he reached me, he gave a small nod. "Richard," he said, his voice low and steady. "We need to talk." I stood, my fists clenched. "Talk? After this? After you destroyed my home?" He sighed, almost as if I was the one exhausting him. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. There was a mix-up. A mix-up. That's what he called it. I stepped closer, the rage boiling inside me. "You demolished the wrong house. Do you even understand that? You destroyed everything I had." His eyes flickered toward the rubble, then back to me. His face remained calm, too calm, like a man rehearsing lines. "We were given an order. The paperwork was clear. Mistakes happen, Richard." "Mistakes happen?" My voice cracked, echoing through the empty street. "You leveled my home. You ruined my life. You call that a mistake? For the first time, his calm slipped. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed. Watch your tone. This community is built on order, rules, authority. Without them, everything falls apart. You'll be compensated. Compensated. Another word meant to silence me. Another word that meant nothing in the face of what I lost. I shook my head. You think money can replace this? You think a check will rebuild the years, the memories, the peace you destroyed? He didn't answer. He just stood there, his silence louder than any machine. Then he turned, walked back to his SUV, and left me standing in the dust. The next morning, I went to the HOA office again. My folder of receipts, now wrinkled and covered in dirt, sat heavy in my hands. I slammed it on the counter, demanding answers. The receptionist wouldn't meet my eyes. She just whispered, "Please take it up with the board." The board. The faceless group who decided my fate, who voted behind closed doors while I slept in the false safety of my home. I demanded to see them. After hours of waiting, they finally let me into a small conference room. The air inside was cold, the blinds drawn tight. Four people sat around the table, their faces blank, their hands folded neatly in front of them. One of them spoke. "Richard, we regret the unfortunate events of yesterday. But we had authority. We had documentation. You must understand." Understand? I slammed my fist on the table. I showed your men proof. Proof it wasn't my house. And they still tore it down. Because of you. Because you didn't care enough to check twice. They exchanged glances, shifting in their seats. One cleared his throat. "We will investigate further. If we find that an error occurred, appropriate steps will be taken." Error? My voice shook with disbelief. You call this an error? Look at me. Look at my face. You destroyed my home. You destroyed my wife's peace. And you think an investigation fixes that? No one answered. Their silence was more terrifying than their words. I leaned across the table, my voice low and trembling. Tell me the truth. Whose house was supposed to be demolished? They froze. The room went colder. Finally, one of them whispered, "Lot number 17. I felt my chest tighten. Lot 17. Just 2 houses down. An abandoned property, overgrown with weeds, its windows shattered years ago. Everyone in the neighborhood knew that house was empty. Everyone knew it was a mess. And yet, somehow, my address was on their papers. I pressed harder. Who signed the order? Who gave the final approval? Again, silence. They looked at each other, eyes darting, lips sealed. And that's when I realized, it wasn't a simple mistake. Somebody wanted this to happen. I left the office shaking, my blood boiling, my heart heavier than ever. Outside, neighbors stared as I walked past. Their whispers followed me like shadows. Some shook their heads. Some smirked. Some avoided me altogether. By the time I reached the rubble of my mansion, my wife was sitting on the steps again, her face buried in her hands. She looked up at me, tears streaking her cheeks. Did they admit it? I sat beside her, my voice hollow. They admitted it wasn't our house. But they won't say who's responsible. Her hands tightened around mine. So what happens now? What happens now? That question haunted me as I stared at the ruins. My life, my dignity, my peace all stripped away by the very people who were supposed to protect the community. And I knew, deep in my gut, that this wasn't over. This was just the beginning of a darker fight. Because if they could cover up something like this, what else were they hiding? If you discovered your HOA destroyed your home by mistake, would you accept their apology and move on, or would you fight them until the truth came out? Be real with me in the comments, I want to hear your answer. I couldn't sleep that night. The sound of collapsing walls still echoed in my ears, looping endlessly. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the claw, the rubble, the blank faces of neighbors who watched but did nothing. But what haunted me most was the silence of the HOA board. They admitted it wasn't my house. They admitted it was supposed to be Lot 17. Yet nobody took responsibility. Nobody said sorry. Nobody cared. I sat outside again, staring at the ruins of what once was my life. The mountain air was cold, biting, but I barely felt it. My wife wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, but even her warmth couldn't push away the emptiness inside me. By morning, the news vans had arrived. Cameras, reporters, microphones, all swarming like vultures to a fresh kill. They wanted the story, the sound bites, the tragedy they could sell in tonight's broadcast. One shoved a mic in my face. "Richard, how does it feel to lose your mansion because of an HOA mistake? How does it feel?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to punch the mic out of his hand. But instead, I just looked into the lens and said, "It feels like being robbed in broad daylight and watching the police walk away." That clip spread like fire. By evening, my face was everywhere. On the news, on social media, even strangers stopped their cars to stare at the wreckage. Some offered sympathy. Most just wanted the drama. But the HOA? They stayed quiet. Days turned into weeks. My house sat there in pieces, a scar on the neighborhood. Kids rode their bikes past it, pointing and laughing. Neighbors whispered louder now, no longer hiding it. Some even said the HOA should finish the job and level what was left. I filed lawsuits. I hired lawyers. But the process was slow, too slow. The HOA had their own attorneys, polished and cold, who twisted every word, every receipt, every shred of evidence. They claimed the paperwork was unclear. They claimed they acted in good faith. Good faith. Destroying my home was good faith. Each hearing left me emptier. Each letter from their lawyers felt like another claw ripping into my chest. My wife tried to stay strong, but I saw the cracks in her eyes. At night, she cried softly, thinking I couldn't hear. She missed our home. She missed our life. And she knew, just like I did, that nothing would ever be the same again. One evening, I walked past Lot 17, the house that was supposed to be demolished. It sat there, dark and empty, weeds choking its yard, windows broken like blind eyes staring back at me. And I thought, why didn't they get it right? Why my house? And then a darker thought crept in. What if it wasn't a mistake? The HOA president had been colder than ice. The board had refused to admit fault. The paperwork had mysteriously placed my address where Lot 17 should have been. Was it really an accident? Or was I targeted? The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I remembered the arguments at board meetings. The time I spoke out against rising HOA fees. The time I voted against their plan to cut down trees on our street. The way the president glared at me when I questioned their budget. I was a thorn in their side. And maybe this was their way of removing me. That thought ate away at me. It kept me awake at night, staring at the ceiling of the one surviving room. My heart pounded with rage, with fear, with the kind of paranoia that doesn't feel like paranoia when everything points to the truth. My wife begged me to let it go. "Richard, please, you're killing yourself. We'll rebuild somewhere else. Just walk away." But how could I? How could I walk away when they had destroyed everything I built, everything I loved, and left me with nothing but ashes? I couldn't. I wouldn't. I started digging deeper. I went through HOA records, board meeting minutes, financial statements. And what I found was worse than I imagined. Missing funds. Conflicting votes. Deals signed without the community's knowledge. Corruption crawling under every page. And sitting at the center of it all, the president. Suddenly, the demolition didn't feel random. It felt deliberate. A warning. A punishment. A way to silence the man who asked too many questions. The pieces fit together too neatly. And the more I uncovered, the more dangerous it felt. One night, as I sifted through documents, a car slowed down outside my broken house. Its headlights lingered too long. Its engine idled, then drove away. My stomach twisted. Was I being watched? Was I getting too close to the truth? Fear and anger battled inside me. One part of me wanted to run, to leave the rubble behind and start over. But the other part, the stronger part, wanted to fight. To drag their corruption into the light. To make them pay for what they did to me, and what they might do to someone else. Because if they could demolish my mansion, they could do it to anyone. I stood in the ruins that night, dust still clinging to the air, and I swore to myself, I would not stop. Not until everyone saw what they had done. Not until the truth was louder than their lies. But deep inside, I knew, once you go against power like this, there's no turning back. If you uncovered proof that your HOA's mistake wasn't really a mistake, would you risk exposing their corruption, even if it meant putting yourself in danger? Or would you stay silent to protect your peace? Tell me in the comments, I need to know what you do. The morning after my vow, the rubble looked different. It wasn't just broken wood and shattered glass anymore. It was proof. Proof of what happens when power is left unchecked. Proof of what happens when people in charge stop seeing neighbors as humans and start seeing them as obstacles. I walked barefoot across the ruins, the gravel sharp under my feet. The silence was louder than ever. But deep inside, I felt something else, something stronger than fear, stronger than grief. Resolve. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a witness. And I was ready to make them face the truth. I began showing the documents I found to anyone who would listen. Reporters, lawyers, neighbors, anyone who wasn't afraid to look. Some turned away, afraid of the board's power. But others leaned in. Others whispered that they had their own stories, their own scars from the HOA. Late fees that didn't exist. Fines for rules that were never voted on. Intimidation. Silence. I realized I wasn't alone. The board had built their power on fear. But fear only works when everyone stays quiet. I gathered the neighbors who dared to speak. We met in living rooms, in coffee shops, even in the back of my shattered house. One by one, people began sharing their stories. The Johnsons had been fined for painting their door the wrong shade of blue. Peterson had been threatened with foreclosure over a missed payment that he proved he never missed. And old Mrs. Green, she cried as she told us the board forced her to tear down the garden she had tended for 30 years because it was not in compliance. Every story was a wound. And together, those wounds painted a picture of something far worse than incompetence. It was control. It was abuse. The HOA wasn't protecting us. It was ruling us. And I had the scars to prove it. The more we uncovered, the louder we became. Reporters returned. Cameras came back. This time, they didn't just film the rubble of my mansion. They filmed the people, the faces, the voices that had been silenced for too long. The board tried to fight back. They sent letters, threats, even lawyers knocking on doors. But fear was no longer enough. We had seen too much. The president called an emergency meeting, trying to regain control. He stood at the front of the room, his tie perfectly straight, his face as cold as stone. He spoke of miscommunication, of errors, of procedures to prevent future incidents. But this time, the room didn't stay silent. I stood up. My voice shook at first, but the anger in my chest gave me strength. I held up the crumpled demolition order, the one with the wrong address. I read it out loud, my voice echoing against the walls. Then I looked him in the eye. You knew. You all knew. And you let it happen anyway. The crowd erupted. Voices shouted, chairs scraped, fists pounded tables. For the first time, the board looked cornered. For the first time, the president's calm slipped. His hand trembled as he tried to quiet the room. But it was too late. The truth was out. Investigations followed. Lawyers dug deeper. The corruption spread wider than even I imagined. Misused funds. illegal votes, contracts signed without approval. And at the center of it all, those same board members, hiding behind the mask of authority. It took months, endless months, but piece by piece, their power crumbled. The president resigned under pressure. Others followed. New faces stepped in, neighbors who had once been too afraid to speak. People demanded transparency, fairness, honesty. As for me, I never got my mansion back. The rubble was eventually cleared, the lot left empty. My wife and I moved into a smaller home down the road. Not the dream we built, but a roof, a place to heal. And yet, I didn't feel defeated. Because sometimes, what you lose becomes the fire that makes sure others don't lose the same. I still walk past that empty lot sometimes. I still hear the echoes of bulldozers in my dreams. But now, when I look at it, I don't just see destruction. I see the spark that exposed the truth. I see the place where fear ended and resistance began. And I wonder, if the HOA hadn't destroyed the wrong house, would the truth have ever come to light? What do you think? Was this really a mistake, or was it their way of silencing me for questioning their power? And if it happened to you, would you forgive and forget, or would you fight until justice was done? Tell me in the comments, I want to hear your heart.